Digital audio health by cymatrax.
Welcome to the Rhonda Grant Show with your host, Rhonda Grant. If you believe that there is more to life than what you see right now, and you want to find out more, listen in as her guests share their journey and their extraordinary experiences. Now, here is your host, Rhonda Grant.
Welcome to the Rhonda Grant Show. Sometimes the universe has a way of placing people or obstacles in your path to help guide and direct you on your mission. Listen in as we discover the path my guest has traveled. Has he been inspired by a calling, crafted his journey, or a bit of both? I invite you to embrace the conversations and to use them to help recognize if this is happening in your life. Our guest today is Garylachman, who is the historian of esotericism and has been recording his own precognitive dreams for 40 years. Dreams, that is, in which he has caught a glimpse of the future. In a unique and intriguing new book, Lachman recounts discovery that he dreams ahead of time and argues convincingly that this extraordinary ability is in fact shared by all of us. Dreaming ahead of time is a personal exploration of precognition, synchronicity, and coincidence, drawing on the work of thinkers including J.W. Dunn, J.B. Priestley, Arthur Koestler, Colin Wilson, P.D. Ouspensky, and C.G. Jung, as well as the latest scientific and statistical evidence for precognition and other paranormal abilities. Lachman's description and analysis of his own experience conveys the uncanny power of our dreaming minds and reveals the illusion of our careful distinction between past, present, and future. Welcome to the Rhonda Grant Show, Gary, and congratulations on the new release of your book, Dreaming Ahead of Time.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me on again, Rhonda. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so pleased that you've joined us. And I guess in the UK, it's about after 8 o'clock at night, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's heading into summertime, so it's that wonderful time which stays light out quite late. Yeah, it's still light out now, so it should be for another, I don't know, half hour or so.
Oh, nice. My first question is, can we see the future in our dreams?
Well, funnily enough, yes, we can. I can, put it that way, and I don't consider myself particularly special in this. And the reason I discovered that I dream the future rather than I can, it's not something I decide to do. It's something I have noticed has happened, and that started quite some time ago. That started about 1980, so it's quite some years ago now, when I was living in New York, and I was a musician then. And I was very interested at the time, and still am, but this was cutting my teeth on it, on the paranormal and the esoteric and the magical and all that sort of thing. So I was reading quite a lot about it then. And I read a book called An Experiment with Time by a fellow named J.W. Dunn, who was not an occultist and not a mystic. He was an aeronautics engineer. But he discovered, quite by accident, that bits of the future were turning up in his dreams.
Okay.
And there's different ones that he tells the stories of. I mean, the one that got him going was that he dreamt that he was having an argument with someone about the time, strangely enough, talking about precognitive dreams. So the first one is an argument about time. And in the dream, he was saying that it was 4:30 in the morning. And the person he was arguing with was saying, no, it's not. And he said, I'll prove it to you. And so he took out his pocket watch, in this back in the day of pocket watches, and in the dream showed someone, and indeed it was 4:30. And then Dunn woke up at that point, and he thought, oh, how strange. I wonder what time it actually is. It was late at night, so he didn't know. He went over and pulled out his pocket watch from his trousers, lit a candle. This was back in the 1890s, so it's quite
Yes.
a while ago now. Looked at his pocket watch, and lo and behold, it was 4:30 indeed. He thought, oh, I must have noticed that my watch had stopped earlier in the day, and I didn't wind it, and that that nagged me, and that's why I had this strange dream. So he wound the watch, put it back in his trouser pocket, went back to sleep, woke up later on thinking, well, when I wake up, I'll have to find out whatever time it is and I can fix the watch. But when he woke up, when he got the watch and went to see what the time was, he discovered it was actually the right time. So in the dream, he had woken up at 4:30. The clock had stopped at 4:30, and somehow the dream had told him this. And this started a whole series of different experiences for Dunn, that he discovered that he was bits and pieces of the future returning up in his dreams. And he said that if you wanted to prove this to yourself, all you had to do was write your dreams down. So I decided to do that. So I started doing that in 1980, and lo and behold, he was right.
That's what happened.
Yeah, I mean, I had the first, I mean, nothing fantastic. I mean, this is one of the points I make in the book, is that the ones we hear about, the precognitive future dreams we hear about, they're what I call the 2 Ds. There's the disasters, and then the derby, the Derby, so there's the disasters. Probably the most well-known account here in the UK is the Aberfan disaster, what happened in the 1960s in Wales, when a coal slip, fell down a hillside and engulfed a school and probably almost this whole village. And it was a horrible disaster. Many people died. And someone dealing, with the aftermath of this and the people who, were survivors of it and so on and so on, he began to ask if anyone had had any sort of dreams before this, and he even got one of the newspapers to sort of put a questionnaire in the Evening Standard
at
the time. And it turned out that quite a few people had dreams of the disaster the night before, the day before it happened. In fact, one victim, sadly, it was a young girl who was in the school. She had dreamt that this black stuff had fallen, down from the hill, and it covered all the whole school. And she told her mother that, that morning, going on to school, and that's exactly what happened. So, and then another example is 9/11. I mean, there's quite a few different things in which it became sort of clear that it was sort of evidence, a pre-echo of it happening. There were sort of album covers, there were magazine covers, and there's an artist named David Mandel who started painting a series of paintings of planes crashing into the Twin Towers 5 years before on that date.
I remember
and
that.
Subsequently, up until it happening. So, and the other ones we hear about are when somebody picks the winners at the races. So this is the Derby. There's a famous case here in the UK, a fellow named John Godley, who he wasn't a punter, as they say himself. He wasn't somebody who went to the races a lot, but he had these dreams in which different names of horses were jumping out at him, basically. And he looked at the racing papers and saw these names or the near equivalents. He didn't bet on them, but told his friends, and his friends did, and they all won money. And this happened repeatedly. And he, in the end, out of that, he got a job as a sort of columnist in a racing paper and all this sort of thing. So these are the ones we usually hear about, or about premonitions, or people wake up and they think, oh my God, I had this dream, and I have to tell whoever it is, my friend or my cousin or somebody, don't go on that flight, don't do this. But the sorts of experiences I've had, and the ones that Dunn had mostly, and others who have noticed this happening, is they tend not to be these big sort of dramatic things. They tend not to be either the disasters or the Derby. They're usually, I say, trivial, inconsequential. And in a few interviews, I've said that, and the person said, "Oh no, there's no inconsequential, no trivial dreams." But I don't mean it in any kind of derogatory way. But I mean it. the dreams that I'm talking about, the ones that I've had in the book and I've recorded for the last 40 years, they're not these big dramatic, they're not the big archetypal sorts of dreams. They tend to be rather banal sorts of things. And if they weren't precognitive, we wouldn't pay that much attention to them, or the only person who would be your therapist, maybe. But, so to give the very first example, as I said, I read this book in 1980, and I was living in New York, and I was a musician at the time, and I dreamt that I was playing a red guitar. Okay, yes. I didn't have a red guitar. I didn't know anyone who had a red guitar, but one day, the day after the dream, I'd written it down dutifully in my dream notebook.
Yes.
And I was out walking and met a friend, and we met somebody else, and we're walking around, and just by chance ended up at someone's place that I didn't know. And sitting there, and he said, "Here, check this out." And he handed me a red guitar. And as I was sitting there and I started to strum it, I realized, oh, this is what I was doing in the dream.
Right.
And something a bit more exciting was the next one. I dreamt about being in a rather intimate setting with a woman that I knew vaguely, but not as well as I'd like to. And I thought, oh well, that's Freudian sort of wish fulfillment. But then, through a series of chance encounters, that evening, I wound up in the situation that I dreamt about with the woman. So it was like, oh my God, this sort of thing actually happens.
Right.
And so the book, I give, a few accounts of these very early ones, but why I came to write the book.
Yes.
That happened because a few years back now, before COVID, but 2019, so it would have been around the spring or maybe the fall of 2019, so just before COVID. Here in London, I gave a talk for there's a group here who organizes different talks in site-specific, locations, so interesting locations. And there was something called the Borderlands of Sleep, and this was the series of talks. And I gave one, and it was on hypnagogia, which is this in-between state.
Yeah.
It's an altered state that all of us experience at least twice a day.
Yes.
It's when we're falling asleep, and it's when we're waking up. And for a brief period, we are in an in-between, a liminal state. We're not completely awake, not completely asleep. We're hovering in between. And with practice, you can learn to hover and stay in that state and be aware of it and watch dreams start to, take place. And you can hear voices, and there's lots of strange things happen in it. So I gave a talk about that. And then sort of to pad the talk out a bit, I added on some accounts of precognitive dreams, because in the hypnagogic state, the hypnagogic state itself seems to be partial to sorts of paranormal experiences.
Yes.
And precognition is one of the ones that tends to be happen most often. And in fact, in Dunn's book, Experiment with Time, he recounts a few things in which he's lying in bed and he's sort of testing whether he can have some image of the future, and he's sort of half asleep, half awake, and he has a variety of different images coming to him, and then that's what happens, as he gets up, later on, and so on and so on. And that's happened to me as well. And so I talked about Dunn's dreams, and I added a couple of my own. And I said, the reason I came to understand that this happens, and I'm not claiming any particular mystic credit or anything. I'm not saying I'm, psychic in any particular way. This is something that I think is generic to human consciousness. We're not aware of it because we don't pay attention.
We don't pay attention. Yes,
we don't pay attention to the dreams, and we don't pay attention to what happens in our life most of the times anyway.
No, we're unconscious, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's true. In both realms.
In both realms.
From both, we're unconscious when we're unconscious, and we're unconscious when we're conscious. And that we know there's a variety of different spiritual teachers have been trying to point that out to us for a long time. And it's very difficult to point things out to people who are unconscious.
Well, it's hard to
asleep,
grasp.
They can't notice you.
Yeah. It's hard to grasp when you're unconscious, because
exactly.
What are they talking about, right?
Yeah, no, that's totally so. But what happened was that the next day, I went on to Twitter, as one does, and
Yes.
one of the first things I saw was a tweet from someone who had been at the talk, or at least this person said she had been at the talk. These days you don't know for sure, but it was OMG, and then exclamation point, it's true. And she managed to say in the tweet, I went to this talk and about, dreaming the future. And the guy said that all you had to do was write down your dreams and you'll see that it's true. And it is. And what had happened was that she said that she had dreamt that she picked a hedgehog up off the street and put it on the pavement on the sidewalk. And hedgehogs are these strange animals that are quite common here in the UK. I don't know if they exist in the States at all, or if they do, what they would be called. But in any case, there's signs for them, like be watch out for the hedgehogs. In any case, so she did that, and she dreamt that, and dreamed it, and when she went onto Twitter, the first thing she saw was a tweet about how to protect the hedgehogs. So it wasn't exactly, she didn't walk out her door and actually pick up the animal and take it off the street onto the pavement. But the very first thing she saw in the media that, she got her information from was that. And I said, well, this is exactly what Dunn says, because Dunn's experience, it's not that you're hovering over this horizon that's the future.
No, yeah.
And you can look, from side to side and see all of it, like Criswell predicts, or Nostradamus, or something like that. It's your own future. It's what's going to happen to you, what you're going to see on, social media, what you're going to see on television, what you're going to read in a book, what you're going to, if you still read newspapers, so and so, that sort of thing. And it's not only that, I mean, who you bump into in the street, and so on, but it's your own personal future. So you can think of it as if our individual lives are a film. And what happens in these dreams is that some bits of the film jump ahead of the queue, as they say here. They jump the line.
Right.
They're a few, they're 20 minutes ahead of the film, and then they jump ahead and they're five minutes, you know what I mean? Something like that. So this is one of the characteristics, and this seems to be the case. I mean, again, there are people who have premonitions. They wake up and my God, I had this dream and I know it's about something. And that's part of this. Right. But this isn't the particular kind of thing that I've yet to wake up thinking, oh my God, I dreamt something in the future. It's always, oh my God, I dreamt that last night.
Yes.
Whoa, and it could be the simplest sort of thing. I mean, and I give different examples in the book. I mean,
yes, you do.
I mean, there's some very dramatic ones. I mean, for me, the one that sort of nails it is in 1990. So when after I gave this talk, and this woman or this person, did this tweet, and that said, okay, maybe I should, see if my publisher's interested in this book. So I got in touch with my publisher. I said, look, I've had all these dreams. I've been going back for 40 years now. I'd like to write about this, are you interested? And they said, yeah, go for it. So, okay. So they commissioned me to write the book. And so I pulled all my dream journals out. And in 1990, I was living in Los Angeles before I moved to London. I had a dream in which I saw scenes from a film about the 1930s pulp character, The Shadow. I mean, I'm a fan of this old pulp sort of stuff and weird literature in general. And The Shadow is this, kind of early superhero who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men. The Shadow knows. And he's been to Tibet, and he's learned just different mystic arts, and he can cloud men's minds, and he can appear as a shadow and then 2D to 3D and all this kind of thing. So, and we also know there's the whole Jungian, thing about the shadow as well. So that element comes in also. So 1990, I have a dream about a film. There's yet to be a film about this. There's old serials made in the 1930s.
Okay.
Come back next week for the next exciting episode, and that
Yes.
sort of thing, made in the 1930s, but not a like full-on Hollywood sort of film. And one scene is the shadow character is two-dimensional. He's against the wall like a real shadow would be. Walk like an Egyptian kind of thing. And then he steps out of the wall and becomes three-dimensional. And he is like a cloak, and he has the hat and the mask over his face. And strangely enough, the mask is very much like the whole COVID thing we've been living with for a few years now. And then there's another scene in my dream. The shadow has these 45 pistols, these automatics. It's kind of his trademark weapon. Exactly. And there's a scene where it's just the gun, and there's a kind of crystal effect or hall of mirrors effect around it. So there's the gun in the center, and then there's all different reflections of the hand and the gun. Okay, so those are two scenes. And then I also, in the dream, I knew that the plot of the film had something to do with the sphere. Some sort of sphere was the central sort of thing about the film. Okay, so that's 1990. So I have this dream. Fine, I write it down. 4 years later, my wife at the time, I refer to her as my future ex-wife. We are going to see this film, the 1994 film with Alec Baldwin, of The Shadow. And if you haven't seen it, it's actually quite good, for the time, and it predates a lot of the superhero films that are, very, very popular now. So, and I say to her, I say, look, I had this dream. I told you we were going to see this film, and I remembered I dreamt this. I pulled out my diary from 1990 and said, look, I had this dream, and let's see what happens. So we see the film, and the two scenes that I had dreamt exactly are in the film. The scene with the shadow character coming out of the wall from 2D to 3D. And then the scene with the gun, the 45, and it's being reflected in this hall of mirrors. And the plot of the film centered around the evil, mastermind wanting to blow up New York, somehow using a beryllium sphere. And the beryllium sphere was some sort of nuclear sort of device at that time. So somehow 4 years in advance, I dreamt two scenes from the film and the plot. So
what do you make of that? Like,
no idea.
Like, do you think to yourself, I could have written a movie around that, or do you question it, or do you just say, I question the sense of how could that possibly happen? What does that mean? What does that tell me about the world? It's all like, our usual idea about time. That's that for starters. Our usual idea about time doesn't quite work. Yes.
It works for most things, and I don't want to upset it in any way, but there are these bits where it doesn't quite work, and how do I account for that? And there's all there's the sort of existential questions, like free will, that whole thing. I mean, in the book I talk about this. I mean, in the book, the dreams are sort of the precognitive dreams bring together two mysteries. There's the mystery of time, which we're talking about now, and then the mystery of dreams themselves. I mean, dreams by themselves are very, very strange. And time by itself is very, very strange. I mean, either one of those things you could, and like I say, you could write a book about, and many have. There's, much written about both of those things. And one of those things that are time is one of those things that, as St. Augustine said a long time ago, when he was asked the question, what is time? He said, if you don't ask me the question, I know the answer. Meaning that it's something that we have an intuitive sense. Of course, I know what it is. It's something that we've already got through a half hour of, in that sense. But then, if you ask me to define it in any very explicit kind of articulate way, I would be at a loss, because you would start to get into metaphor and all that, and because time is made up of the past, the present, and the future, but none of those things is accessible at any time.
None of it.
Right? The past is gone, right? The future hasn't happened, and the present just slips. It went there. Wait. I mean, there you go. So it's like, I
gone.
mean, it's like, so that by which we understand time is inaccessible, but there's no other way for us to understand it, because
It's
I
so
can come to the conclusion that, my God, yes, the mystics and the philosophers are right. It's true, it doesn't exist, but I do know that, an hour from now I'll be doing something else. So it slips through our fingers, but it's ever present. So it's one of these imponderables, and we also think of it as something that moves, something that flows. So, but if time is a river, where are its banks? I understand a river. If I want to use the metaphor of a river is a body of water that flows through the land, and there's banks on either side. But there are no banks to the river of time. Or if you want to use the other sort of metaphor, Andrew Marvell, the poet, the chariot, time's winged chariot. It's the future rushing towards us. I mean, the river, it's like flowing away. So that's sort of the melancholy. It's all flowing past. As the past is the other side of us. And the kind of anxious sense of the time is the winged chariot. It's like rushing towards me. But a chariot, we understand a chariot as this vehicle that goes along a road. But a road has pavements. There's flanks. Just like the river of time, where are the flanks? On the pavement that the chariot of time moves on. So it's a metaphor we have, but when you actually try to grab it, it kind of dissolves. And so it's the sense. So what I'm saying is like things take place. There's a process, but we tend to think there's this stuff called time in which they take place. But I don't know. I wonder if there's even this stuff called time. I mean, it's a way we have to understand the process that takes place around us.
Well, and I mean, we have time here, but there is really no time. It's space-time continuum, right? But
I mean, there's natural
contemplate
time.
This for me. Why is it? Why do you feel that time just seems to rush, except for if you go and do something where you're waiting, it just slows right down. And it's almost like, depending on what you're doing, depends on how fast time goes in your life.
Yeah, no, it's true. I think it's a factor of consciousness. It's the old joke is, if you have a toothache in the dentist's office, 5 minutes is an eternity. And well, it'll sound sexist. It's something like, if a pretty girl is sitting on your lap, it goes by in 5 minutes. We know what I mean, sort of thing. So it's like it's a pleasant or horrible experience. So yeah, it's a factor of your consciousness, and this is something that we know from our experience. If you're bored, I mean, boredom. I would say boredom by definition is the sense of time solidifying, where you're aware of every bit. Oh my God, I just looked at the clock and it's only 5 minutes. And whereas, as you say, if you're interested in something, if you're absorbed in something, if your consciousness is participating in something, then hours can go by and you're not even aware of it. So it has much to do with that. And I have, the precognitive dreams that I have, they're the most striking for me example or experience in my own life and in other people. I talk about people like Dunn and J.B. Priestley and Uspensky and some other people and Colin Wilson, who have looked into these mysteries. And but it's part of a gradient, and just in sort of waking experience. I mean, I talk about there's a wonderful book called the Dance of Time by a fellow named Edward Hall, and it's about his experience with Native American Indians. And he talks about how in different contexts he spent a great deal of time with Native American Indians, and this affected his whole sense of time. And he tells
way?
Well, he tells a story where he went with a party of others to transport some horses from one reservation to another or something along those lines. And I guess if you had them in the back of a pickup and you were driving, it would maybe take, whatever amount of hours, but the rate they had to go, relatively slowly.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't on the highway, it was across the plain,
Right.
kind of thing. And this was something that he wasn't used to. And it took time itself for him to adjust to this different sort of sensibility of time and space also.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not zooming past something on the highway where, like, the mountain that you zoom past on the highway, the way they were going, it took him several hours, to go along it. And so he could see it from all these different angles and that kind of, that sort of different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
And he said it took him about 3 days to adjust. And then after about 3 days on the horse, because he's on a horse himself, leading these other horses with
Right.
the people across, the plain somewhere. He started to feel very, very different sense of himself, his own location and the space they were in, and
Mm-hmm.
his own sense of time. And while I didn't do anything like that, ride a horse across the prairie or something,
Mm-hmm.
I tell a couple stories where when I was living in Los Angeles and I wanted to get away for a while, and I went up to the sequoias.
Yes.
In Northern California, these gigantic trees, they're huge. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I visited them again, just before COVID hit at the end of 2019. I was in California. Well, after that's a different thing, but Omega
Mm-hmm.
was on that side, and then I was over on the other side because I did something at the Esalen.
Okay.
And then spent a couple of days just driving up Northern California, and I went to the sequoias there, and it's like I forgot how big these things are.
Yes.
How ancient they are. But back in the day, back in the 90s, when I was living in California, I went up and rented a cabin for a week. But for the first 3 days, I couldn't adjust. I mean, even though I knew, I said, okay, what's the problem?
Mm-hmm.
You're here amidst nature and wonderful, and you're away from the city, and all the stuff that you want to get away from, it's not here. And then some part of me was annoyed by that. All the things that I was used to having around me weren't there.
Right.
And it felt completely disoriented. It couldn't go and whatever, pick up this or do that, whatever it usually does. And I just found myself thinking, Jesus, is this a big mistake? Should I go home? What am I doing here? Oh, no.
Yeah, what's wrong with me? Why am I not enjoying it?
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then just like, okay, just sit this out and whatever. And I'm writing feverishly in my journal. It's like, and then about 3 days, it was like, oh, okay. Whatever,
Mm-hmm.
that part of me just adjusted.
Mm-hmm.
And
you have to slow
then
right
like for
down.
the rest of the week, it was fine. I was like walking through these avenues of giants and all that. And then similarly, I tell a story about more recently, I was living in London, and I had to have operation on one of my knees,
Mm-hmm.
and I was on crutches for a while, and taking a walk, to a local kind of park, which normally would have maybe taken me 5 minutes or 10 minutes, took me, I don't know, half hour or whatever, 40 minutes. But the thing was, each step was deliberate.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're looking down all the time, because I don't know if you ever had to walk on crutches, because it takes a bit of time to get used to them.
Mm-hmm.
But what I noticed is that the focus and the having to slow down, I was just noticing all these things, like all these flecks of mica in the pavement, the sunlight are on them, and they're like, it's the sort of thing that, had you taken some psychedelic, you would probably be, oh, wow, that.
A different experience.
And there's the crack, even the cracks in the pavement, they seem to be deeply meaningful to me, suggestive of something.
Yes.
And I wasn't on any, I'm not suggesting get knee surgery to have this experience, but this is what happened. And I remember stopping at one point, had to take a rest, and, just leaning on a tree, and there's a leaf, and classic moment with the sunlight piercing leaf. And it's like, yep, okay, yes, I'm seeing this leaf for the first time. And how is that coming about? Because I forced, or circumstances forced me to slow down. And that had an effect on my experience of time. And this is something that, this is true of us. We all have this capacity to do this. We just, sadly, our lives are
We
so
don't.
busy and so
Busy.
full and so demanding
Mhm.
and unrelentingly, occupied and filled up with things that we never understand this. And this is one reason why, Jung and others said, sometimes you have an illness. It's in order for that to happen. It hits you because, you won't stop yourself, and this will stop you so that
It will.
you can have this experience.
Right. You're listening to the Rhonda Grant Show right now, whose podcast has been treated with digital audio health by my sponsor, cymatrax. And I am speaking with Gary Lachman today. And where may people buy your book and reach out to you, Gary?
Well, they can buy it at all reputable bookshops and I guess online, all the usual places. And I have a blog. It's just my name, all lowercase, garylachman.co.uk. I'm also on Facebook and on Twitter. So, I mean, these days it's kind of hard not to find somebody.
It is,
So
yes.
if you really want to find me, I'm there.
I want you to talk a little bit about coincidences. And what does it mean? What's the difference between coincidences and synchronicities, for instance? Like, this seems to be a bit of a question. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, a synchronicity is a term that Jung coined. And it's, it's kind of a pseudoscientific term to basically refers to what we would call meaningful coincidence.
Right.
So there's coincidences where it's like, okay, there's, I'll give you a couple examples I put in the book. A couple years back, myself and, friends were out to dinner and we got the bill and it came to 123 pounds and 45 pence. So it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Right.
So what a coincidence. How funny. You just noticed that's the
noticed it. Yeah.
First natural numbers, something like that. And then I'm another one I noticed, I'm working on a book and at the end of the day, I stop and I do a word count and it's 6,666.
Cool.
So that requires a little bit of kind of magical or occult knowledge, or the 666 is the number of the beast in the apocalypse or something. So yeah, funny, no big deal. You tweet about it. What does that mean? That kind of thing. So,
oh yeah.
But then if say you're whatever you're reading, you're reading something, right? And you see a name in the book that you're reading, and then somehow just by chance a bus goes by or something goes by and the same name is very prominent there at the same time that you're reading it in the book. So that's interesting. But then that name actually is the name of a friend of yours, and you've been meaning to get in touch with that person and to, last time we talked, I left, it was really bad, I should have done something like that. So suddenly, sort of, okay, it's interesting enough in the first place that, I just read the name and there's the name over there. And funnily enough, I don't know, this may qualify me, to need to see a professional, but I mean, I often read something and I hear the name on the radio, or I mean, and again, this is not as unusual as you might think. Right. When I was doing the reading for my book, I came across quite a few accounts where people said the same thing, where they said, "Oh my God, this happens so often. I'm thinking something, boom, they say it on the radio or it was on the TV or something like that." So, well,
it's having a heightened sense of awareness as well. And once you start noticing these things and being grateful that you're noticing them and welcome them and talk about them and write about them, the more they seem to show up.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, you could, does it mean that the same amount of them is there all the time? You're just more aware of it, or is your engagement with it somehow generating it? I don't know. I mean, I tend to take a more active view of it, in the sense that somehow the fact that I'm more aware of these things and just more active in my consciousness in some ways, more active in my intention and all that, is a good thing. I mean, and the next step would be, I mean, it's getting onto like the synchronicity, like it's a very meaningful coincidence. I mean, one of the ones I talk about in the book is, again, just before COVID, I was on my way to give a talk here in London to the Theosophical Society about the writer Colin Wilson, who's an English writer who's been very influential in my work. And he was probably, most well known in sort of the paranormal worlds in the 70s and the 80s. But his first big book, 1950s, was a book called The Outsider, and it was a study of existentialism and sort of alienated geniuses and things of that sort.
Yeah.
So I was on my way to give a talk about that, and just on my way there, I thought, oh, there's something I need at the market, and I just popped into the local market here. And I got what I needed, and I got into the line to pay for it. And while I was, in the checkout, they have the magazine rack there, and I just glanced over. And the magazines were so arranged that all I could see of the cover of Vogue was just the title that it was Vogue, and then the title of the lead article. And the title of the lead article was The Outsider. Okay. So I'm on my way to give a talk about The Outsider. And all I can see on this cover of Vogue is The Outsider. And I'm in a rush, and I'm thinking, what the? And it's all, what? It's, okay, yeah. So I go and I pay for the stuff, and I'm going, and I take a photo of it, and I put it on Twitter, and then I bring it up at the talk, because it's the sort of thing Wilson himself later on would have thought was, interesting. He would have got a kick out of it. But later that day, after the talk, I'm coming back home, and I realized, there's something else I need. I forgot. I should have. I'll just pop in again. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to go look at that copy of Vogue to see what that article was about, because it could have been about, Colin Wilson, but it wasn't there. They had changed the magazines. So I would not have seen it had I not popped in then and there. So all I can say is, who, what, knew I was on my way to talk about The Outsider, decided, go in there, and we'll give you a little tap on the shoulder to tell you that we got an eye on you. We know what you're doing. I hope it's a good sign, but what can I say? So that's the sort of thing, that I would say that constitutes a synchronicity to me, because it's meaningful. It's like this. It's like, it's not just, isn't that funny? The same name. Again, the other thing, there's coincidences that pile up, and they're just
right,
remarkable in their own way, and they create a whole bizarre kind of thing. Like, what the heck is, who could be responsible for that?
And sometimes I find with synchronicities, there's a series of things that have had to have happened in order for a series of other things to happen. And that's when you start putting things together. But coincidences seem to be just those random sort of chance of luck or whatever. I found anyway, is what I write about.
Yeah. Well, there's different, there's an interesting character that I write about in the book, a fellow named Paul Kammerer, who was an Austrian biologist in 100 years ago now, in the 1920s. And Arthur Koestler, who nobody reads anymore, who was another writer from the 20th century, who was a political writer and wrote about science, but then he got very interested in parapsychology and that sort of thing. So he did a book about this fellow. But one of the things Kammerer did was that he had this idea of what he called seriality, in the sense that the same sorts of things would happen in sequence, or they would cluster simultaneously. And he wasn't aware of synchronicity. He wasn't aware of Jung and synchronicity, and he didn't think of it in any kind of psychic kind of way. He thought it was some sort of strange law of nature, like gravity. Like attracts like. But he collected all these examples of coincidences, and then he categorized them. So there's like different levels of coincidences, different sort of levels where, number of things coinciding and ramifications and things of that sort. But one of the interesting things that Koestler talks about was the strange helpful agency that he called the library angel. And this is something that writers like myself and others out there, and I'm sure you too, we have all experienced this, when you're looking for some particular bit of information you've seen it somewhere, it's somewhere, you can't remember where it is, everything around, you just reach over, grab a book, and then bang, it opens up to that page. And Kessler tells a story of the writer Rebecca West, who was researching material from the Nuremberg trials at the London Library here. And she discovered that the way the trials were organized, it just was impossible to find anything. There was just, it was like a completely kind of just arbitrary system of sort of, they weren't organized in terms of content.
Confusion.
So it's just like you can never possibly know by how they were organized what is in any one. Oh, excuse me. And so she spent, hours, trying to find what she was looking for in the library. And in frustration, she just grabbed a librarian walking by and she said, how could I possibly find anything here? I've been looking for this for hours. I can't find anything. It could be in any one. It could be in that one. She grabbed the thing, pulled it down, opened it up, and there it was.
You're kidding.
So this is something that, and Kessler himself tells a story where he, in the early 70s, he was commissioned to go see the Bobby Fischer, Boris Spassky chess match in Reykjavik, his famous chess match back then. And Kessler was a chess fanatic, but he hadn't kept up, with the latest games and all that sort of thing. And he hadn't been to Iceland before, so he thought he'd better go and do a bit of homework. And he too went to the London Library, and he thought, okay, chess, Iceland, which one should I start with? I'll start with chess. And he went to the chess section, and the very first book he saw was Chess in Iceland. It was like a history of chess in Iceland. So it's these kind of weird things. So it's like it's half trickster, half helpful. It's kind of like, oh, okay, here, you looking for that? So,
is it kind of like it's almost like you feel like you're guided when these things happen?
Well, yeah,
because it feels magical. Like how do things like that happen?
Exactly. That's how, I come away from this. One of the things I say in the book is that I'm not, a physicist, and I don't understand half of the stuff about, elementary particles. I'm just like most people. I've read quite a bit about elementary particles and things of that sort. Or the crazy physics stuff. So, and that generally comes up in these conversations.
Yes.
So somehow quantum physics can explain this, but I'm sorry, I have to say, I just, maybe it does, but maybe I'm too dense and I don't get it, but I just don't understand how, okay, there's positrons that can move backwards in time. It's like, fine, but do I have them? It's like, it's like, I don't know how that helps me. Whereas for me, it's this existential sort of moment where it's sort of like, whoa, like, what is that? What does that mean?
What does it mean?
What does it mean about the world that actually just happened now? What does it mean about me that it happened just now?
I know.
What is trying to tell me something? And so that's, I'm saying this in a sort of, exaggerated way, I don't in any way want to diminish, the work of, people working in quantum physics and all that. But I think there's a whole kind of, what I would call the immediate existential phenomenological level of these experiences that doesn't really get, too much attention. It gets sort of like, oh, how can we explain it possibly happening in terms of this sort of stuff? And I'm not particularly interested in explaining how it happens. I'm interested in saying, what does it mean? Which is a different kind of thing. I'm not interested in explaining how a sunset happens, but I am interested in what does it mean that I feel the sense of awe and wonder in front of the sunset. So it's a different kind of approach to it.
It's a very different, and it's the latter approach that I really like. So do you feel that you've been called to what you do? How many books
I've been shouted at? Yes.
You've been shouted at. How many books have you written?
It takes about 25 now.
25, that's what I thought. So you, in some way, must feel that you're called on your journey?
Well, I'm still trying to figure out, actually now, having written all these books, and, I'm not getting any younger, as everyone says, as you're getting older.
Yeah.
thinking, well, what does it mean? How did I get interested in all this sort of thing? Why was I interested? Why, when I read books about this in 1975, when I was a musician, 19 years old, living on the Bowery, New York, did I not say, well, this is a load, or, whatever. Why did I think, whoa, wow, this is incredible? And
you're very attracted to it.
Well, that was my, I'd read a lot before. I just wasn't interested in magic and the occult and paranormal, that sort of thing. I was always reading. I guess the first serious book I read was Siddhartha, the Hermann Hesse novel. That must have been about 1970 when I was about 14. And, so like many other people from my generation, that early 70s, sort of late 60s generation, Hesse was a big phenomenon. So that was kind of the introduction to a lot of people, this sort of thing. And then I just got, from that, I got interested in it. But I wasn't really, I read Nietzsche and Sartre and the existentialists and all that kind of thing. And they were like the cool, hip people to read, but I didn't get interested in sort of magic per se, or the occult, or spirituality and esotericism, until I was living in New York and playing in band Blondie before we were anybody. We were nobody then. And
you wrote a song.
Well, that was the thing. It was a song at the time, but before I started recording all these precognitive dreams, was about these shared dreams I had.
Shared dreams,
my girlfriend. It's called "I'm Always Touched by Your Presence, Dear."
Beautiful.
And that came about
I love that.
Oh,
I love it.
Thank you. When we were on tour, it just turned out that she and I were having the same sorts of dreams, or we called each other at the same time, and it was that whole kind of experience, which again tends to happen in relationships. Personal emotional relationships are the strongest media through which these sorts of experiences happen. Yes. So that's why, in the clinical context of some parapsychological lab, it breaks down. That was one of the strange things when I was doing the reading for this book. Is like, physics starts out as this dry as dust kind of boring kind of thing. Yeah. Right. And then, initially parapsychology, oh my God, ESP, mind power, this is very, very exciting. But then they exchange roles. And then, the scientific study of parapsychology increasingly gets boring and boring and boring with Zener cards and, trying to affect the dice all the time. But then in the physics department, everybody's, oh my God, the latest particle. Did you see what that thing did? It went backwards in time. Wow. It's like, so the computer change kind of weird sort of thing. And so again, not to diminish the work of people that are, in parapsychological labs doing this sort of, it is.
It's very interesting.
It's interesting and it's important, but I think the actual kinds of experiences is something much more to do with your everyday life, and
yes, exactly.
It's the kind of things that are tuned into, love or any just your experience of something.
Your experience.
So it's less something that you can make happen, in that way, than it does happen.
It does happen.
You can pay attention to it and be aware that it happens.
And question it.
Yeah. And what does that mean? Why is it happen? Why is it? Well, yeah, of course. What does it mean? I don't know. I've been recording these dreams for 40 years, and it's only now, 42 years, it's only now, or only 2 years ago, that I said, okay, maybe I should write about this.
Yeah.
And I come away with it just sort of increasing the sense of mystery and thinking, I really still have to go now and think about this, even after I wrote the book about it.
Well, your books are addicting. It's one of those things that when I start reading or I'm listening, you have a couple in audio as well. I can't stop listening. I just want to know, where are you headed with this? Where are you going? It's just, your work is so sophisticated. I love it. So what extraordinary discovery have you found in your life?
Extraordinary discovery, practically everything. That's the thing. Everything's extraordinary. That's what I've discovered now. One of my favorite stories I tell is not about me, but it's about the Russian philosopher P.D. Uspensky, who's most known as an exponent of the work of Gurdjieff, as important esoteric teacher. But he was Uspensky was an important philosopher in his own right, but he talks about he was doing these experiments with nitrous oxide. This is way back in the day, way before the drug culture. This is very, very early 20th century. But and it came about because he had read different accounts of cosmic consciousness and
Oh,
things.
yes.
So he wanted to experiment and to see, what it was like. But in this particular one episode, when he was experimenting with this, he found himself, sort of sitting on his sofa and smoking a cigarette. And he looked over at the ashtray, and suddenly he realized everything possibly to do with the ashtray suddenly became known to him immediately, in the sense of like, who discovered fire, who discovered tobacco, who discovered mining, how did they learn how to it was a copper ashtray, how did they learn how to smelt the ore, how did they get that, so all this sort of, I should say, information about it that if you wanted to, you could find out, and go to the library and read all this stuff. It would take some time, and you'd have to, but suddenly it all came to him immediately. And the reason I'm telling you is that he came away thinking, we don't understand the simplest sorts of things around us. They're everything around us is the kind of center of an extraordinary web of meanings radiating out all around. And it could be the simple, we know this from people like William Blake, he says heaven in a wildflower and eternity in a grain of sand or whatever. I'm probably misquoting him there. But, that's close. Something that, as I find as I get older, that's sort of, the more, I become more aware of something like that. And I become sadly aware of the amount of time I've wasted not being aware of that, and hoping I have enough time left in me to make take the best advantage of that insight.
You have more books in you?
I'll keep. I mean, the thing of the writer is like, once you write it and you realize, you just keep going.
I know you can't
as long as
stop.
somebody publishes it, I'll keep doing it. That's the thing. I mean, I guess the next thing I have in mind is something sort of autobiographical, but I don't, it's just a vague idea now.
Big idea. Well, it's just been such a joy and a pleasure to have you on the show. I love your book, Dreaming Ahead of Time. It's fantastic. And so thank you very much for coming on the show. I could talk to you for another whole hour. I really could. I've had to watch.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're so interesting. You have lots of stories, and I just loved it. So thank you so much for being here with me today.
Oh, it was absolutely my pleasure, Rhonda. Thank you.
Theme song for The Rhonda Grant Show, Sun on the Water, is composed and performed by my friend John Park-Wheeler. This is Rhonda Grant with The Rhonda Grant Show, author of Magical Forces Within, Extraordinary Discoveries in an Ordinary Life, inviting you to look for the magical forces within yourself today and every day. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in to The Rhonda Grant Show with your host, Rhonda Grant. If you would like to find out more information about Rhonda and her upcoming guests and the work that she does, go to her website, rhondagrantauthor.com. That's rhondagrantauthor.com.
Digital audio health by cymatrax.